Um, welcome to Council Table of Leaders, where there's no mere mortal. We're all immortals here in the sense that we're all designed and created in God's image. Today, we're going to be talking about bubble jumping, which is kind of a new vernacular, but you'll find that it's comfortably probably in your mindset already as a Christian. I'll just keynote it with the idea of faith, that faith is the best way to be a good bubble jumper. And so we'll move forward with that. But a few weeks ago, we talked about change. I think a few of you were on there for change. Anybody remember any thoughts about change? Anything changed since you've listened to change? Can you think of the 4 levels of change that we talked about?
One of them was knowledge, isn't it?
That's a good one. Yeah, that's the first one we talked about. That's the simplest one we said that was easiest to change. You have an example of that, Michelle?
I mean, everything I do at work, if there's a change, it's really helpful to know why we're making the change and clear details on what the change is and what the expectation is.
Good. Anybody have something that's changing in your life right now? I know like Art Druckenmiller can't be here because his life is changing. He's selling his house that he's been in for, I think he said 41 years. And so that's a huge change. And it's actually, for a guy that's been in the military and so forth, this is one of the first times he said this is really got him stressed out, because you have all these things that you've collected for, a number of years. Art's, I think, 81. And so he's, just the challenge to try to figure out what you need to get rid of after 81 years. So it's he's going through a change. But is anybody going through a change right now that you want to share with us, and we'll help you with some thoughts about that?
I'm going to Pennsylvania at the beginning of May for only a week to put my house on the market. And I know there's repairs that have to be done, but the tenant has not allowed my realtor in the house yet. And I know that's his responsibility, but I'm feeling a little anxious. I mean, I woke up in the middle of the night thinking of all the things that might have to be done, which I hadn't contemplated at all until the middle of the night when I woke up. So that's a change. And the change that's happening for me is that is a house I own that I can afford to live in forever. And I have listened to the Lord very carefully for a lot of years, 6, 7, 8, about selling it. He's finally released me to sell it, which means that I'm in a rental and I won't have any roots on earth at all. And that's a change.
Wow.
That's a change. So if my rent goes sky high here, I'm in real situation. So that's changed. And I trust him because he's released me, and he's a faithful father.
That's a big one.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're going to talk in a minute about, what keeps us from being able to change, and we'll kind of work through that, and then we'll get to the bubble jumping. Anybody else have something to share? It's okay if you don't, but I would suggest that if you have something that you might think it's minor change, just think about that, because the culture, one of the things, yes, Miss Kate, you have a question?
Oh, I was just going to share change.
Okay.
I didn't want to cut you off.
If you'll hold that thought, let me bump into the change real quick. I'm gonna just run through what we did a couple of weeks ago just to get the mindset into change, and then we'll jump into bubble jumping. So I'm gonna do. I'm not really great at PowerPoints. I don't, because I'm constantly looking at the PowerPoint instead of talking. It's like, so I feel like it's distracting for me, but I think it's better for you guys. So let me share my screen here. And can y'all see that? Is that all right? Is that looking pretty good? So David's got thumbs up. I love David. Give me some emoji. All right, taste this. council table, bubble jumping, and we'll get into why we use bubbles in a minute, but let me just refresh your mind on the 4 levels of change we talked about, which Michelle was talking about. Knowledge was the simplest one. In other words, when you hear change is coming and you start feeling change down in your heart, and I'll just say that typically fear is the biggest thing that'll challenge us when change comes, because it feels, we feel awkward, we feel uncertain, and so forth. And we'll talk about in a second just the strategies to kind of overcome them. But knowledge is the first thing, just getting some more knowledge about what's happening. For example, I just called a doctor today, and they wanted me to go get an x-ray about something, and I've never done what they wanted, an MRI, and I'm going, what do I do? I have no idea. Can you explain the process to me? But she was actually like, don't you know this? I said, no, I've never had an MRI before. So the knowledge is really helpful to help us get there. The second one is attitude. That's when your behavior to this, it's a little bit harder to change, because once you get that thought in your mind, like, oh, this is going to be scary, it'll affect your behavior. And so the second one, it comes from the first one, is the more knowledge we get, and the better that we can understand it, the fear level, the anxiety level tends to go down, and our behaviors become better. The third one is the behavior or the action, I would say at this point. Those first 2 will affect the third one, because if you're afraid of something, like, for example, if I'm afraid to get an MRI, then, my tendency is not to pick up the phone and make the reservation, and so forth. So the action is the third level. What happens here typically in the midst of change, let's say that, for example, I went on a diet a couple of years ago. I typically haven't had a need to do that, but I couldn't seem to get the pounds off. And I've been around now other people who have told me about their program and so forth. And they said, I've lost like 1,000 pounds 100 times, and they lost 10 pounds a piece, and then they would gain the pounds, and they have to lose it. And that's where the action becomes a challenge, because now our patterns of belief and thinking just continue to stay there. We really aren't changing. We're just kind of repeating the process. And that's where it becomes most frustrating. But that's where bubble jumping, if we can get into that, makes a difference. The fourth level is organizational change. And like for David's life, that's where his life is all day long. So we talk about it being internal first for the employees. And then if we can get the employees to begin to be willing to change, then we can usually implement some change into the organization. So he would be able to probably explain that one backwards and forwards for us. The strategies for change, I didn't list here, but basically we had 9 levels, or not levels, but the characteristics of change. And usually, if you can think of the emotions that go with it, that you bump into, whether you know them consciously or subconsciously, sometimes we don't know that fear is there. Sometimes we don't know anger is there, or frustration. For example, when I took a course with Art Druckenmiller, it was called Life Skills, and they presented a thought to us that said anger was a secondary emotion. And I just went, that doesn't make any sense to me. When I get angry, I know it. And what they were saying was that anger sometimes is triggered by a secondary emotion that's deeper down, that's telling the first one. And one of the times I realized it was when I got cut off in traffic. I was frustrated and angry with the person that cut me off. And the Lord said, that's not the person that you're really angry with. He said, you're angry with your brothers because they would always cut you off since you were the little brother. And so there was the true answer, that I had to reconcile that and forgive them. And then I found, oh my gosh, that was a secondary emotion. So there's some things that when we jump into change and so forth, there's some personal things that get uncovered. And that's why as a Christian, we have the best advantage in our culture to help people address change, because God has given us the Holy Spirit and the scriptures and ability to have better knowledge. And then we can get our thinking right, with the fruit of the Spirit and so forth. So we have the tools at our hands, but we just sometimes don't know how to use them in each situation. And that's why it's always good to have brothers and sisters in Christ to come alongside. So those are part of the when it comes to strategies to change, is that one, recognize your emotions, being able to implement the scriptures and the wisdom and so forth into that, get a better knowledge and insight on who you are. And then also what we call bumper buddies in this, so you may call them people that are accountable to you, or prayer partners, or whatever, people that are intimate to your life, and you bring those along with you. Those help make the change a lot easier. And so, like in Art's case, he's got some of his family members that are helping with his change. I'm sure with Julia, you've got some resources that you've got at hand there too. So we can go deep and wide into this. That's why I call it a taste of TL. Each one of these things we could spend a lot of time, because it is very important, particularly in organizational situations, but also in your own personal life and family life, that these are important. I'll stop here just so that's kind of a capsule of the change that we talked about a couple of weeks ago. Any thoughts, ideas, questions? We also teach in TL that silence is good. It's good for the soul but sometimes silence creates a little bit of panic, like, oh, does he know what he's going to say next? I'm never without words to say. It's just sometimes, do they mean anything? Let's talk into bubble jumping. Bubble jumping, to me, in the way we teach it in TL, it's a fascinating little thought process. And by the way, when we're teaching TL, we can do it in both what we call the plain glass situation or stained glass, meaning we can put the Christian thoughts and ideas into it. As you can tell, I prefer talking about it with the Christian attributes in it, but we can clear out the scriptures and just give them the plain glass version. And so when we talk about bubble jumping, you won't hear about faith and so forth. You just hear that this is a good idea to do it, but it sure makes a lot more sense. And that's the way Ford Taylor, when he created this, that, it came out of a lot of challenges in his own life at the moment, both from he ran a company that he took it to Wall Street in an IPO, and but also in his personal life, he was going through some challenges. And so a lot of these bubbled up, as it were, through those challenges. And I think God's made it a really important but very simple process if you want to go through it sometime. So learning about bubble jumping, the idea is that we're going to take change and we're going to head into change with a positive attitude and go for it. But we're going to talk a little bit about what constrains us. And one of the thought processes we use in TL is having sort of in the box thinking. Have you ever heard of that? Thinking outside the box. And when you think about what does it mean to think inside the box, anybody got an idea what it means to be thinking inside the box, if thinking outside the box is a good idea?
I would say inside the box is from experience and maybe rules and regulation and doing what everybody else does or following the manual.
Okay. Other thoughts?
I think of inside the box as guaranteed inputs and guaranteed outcomes.
Okay. Two good answers.
I'd like to share that I just think that sometimes it's like a fortress. And so it's a place for your comfort zone and security, and it's not seeking growth.
Mm-hmm. Good points. There's a lot more to that. I'm gonna leave that to you a little bit more, but what I'm putting up on the screen just to remind you of what causes us not to want to change. The fear of the unknown, anxiety around personal expectations, lack of vision to grasp the future, frustration with time and process, people who are not helping and cannot get out of the box thinking. When we think of in the box, like you're saying, they're your own personal habits, the process of doing things, like y'all were saying. I like the idea of guaranteed out, process gives you guaranteed output. The beliefs about yourself in that situation, your view of the world around you and how you fit into it. If there's insecurity and fear and doubt about your role and so forth, all that's going to bubble up in effect. And so when change comes, it's like, nope, I'm staying right here. And so in the box thinking is a safe and secure environment. And I'll say that I haven't read this anywhere, at least in the concise way that I sense it, is that the brain, when it walks into a situation, whether it's into say a party, a meeting at work, that and it's kind of a new environment, maybe it's new people that's been brought into the meeting. The brain has, I think, at least two simple functions that it's going to analyze. One is, am I loved? And am I safe? And if it can answer those two questions in the affirmative, they're probably going to be willing to at least listen to change or whatever's going to go on in the room. If they're not, I think you've got a big hurdle to come over, and bubble jumping in this case is not going to happen because you're going to stay inside the box. Again, there's other things you can add to that, but if you kind of take sort of the roots of fear and the roots of being safe, which or love, I should say, and because we know that if you're loved, you're accepted, you're affirmed, those sort of things, you feel comfortable in your own skin, you're going to have a better reaction to things. And if you're safe, you feel like at least you can handle and control some of the environment. So thinking about those when you're thinking about change, and okay, if change is a little awkward, okay, how do we get out of that? How can we get out of the box thinking? That's where we think, okay, if we can do that, that's where, a few years ago when they came up with destructive, I almost had it, not destructive, but disruptive. There you go. That's the word. The disruptive technologies and so forth. That was kind of the game changer. If you could come up with a new company or a new way of doing stuff that would disrupt the current patterns and create what some people would say a blue ocean strategy. In other words, nobody's ever done this before, but you become the leader in that. You have a better chance of getting market share. You got a better chance of maybe have profitability and so forth. So that disruption was a good thing, but it created change and chaos for a lot of people. And, like when the iPhone came out and everybody was used to flip phones, I had a lot of personal friends at my age, they were going like, that stuff, blah, 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 I'm not going to change. And you just see that, and you have the early adopters and the late adopters and so forth. And that's all around this character idea of change. So how can we as Christians, to me, model particularly, and again, why to me this is important, the last 2 years particularly have been just full of change. And so as you're thinking about this, how can we become so comfortable that we know that, one, we're loved and that we're safe no matter where we go, when we go. Like in Julia's case, she's going to give up her roots of her house. Those two things are going to come into place. So how can she move through that change? And that's where we're going to talk about bubble jumping. And I'm going to go through it kind of fast. It's really a pretty simple concept if you just use faith, trust, and love in those areas. Let me skip down through a little bit of the this getting out of your box. Well, let me go back here. Yeah, get in your box. One of the things at this expression, Ford loves doing this, and I think it's very, very important. You can't see me do it, but he does it live on stage. He says, when change comes and you think you got out of the box, and let's think about the diet, for example, or something that you've changed, but you just didn't feel comfortable. What happens? He'll say, what happens to you when you start feeling uncomfortable? Somebody been in this situation? Like in the diet, we want to get
Go
back
back
into
to what's comfortable.
yeah, go back to what's comfortable. And that's, you know, all of us are that way. It's kind of like when I go visit somebody at their home and their bed's not comfortable. What do I long for? I want to go back to my, and again, there's nothing wrong with habits. There's nothing wrong with, but when change comes, and this is again where a Christian has a greater chance that when change comes and you know God has asked you to change, like, hey, Kate, you want to go to Romania? You just had tickets just to go to Dubai. So, hey, how about let's just shift it and go over here to Romania? Who could do that? Just Kate. I mean, that's crazy. You're amazing. So here's, I love this little picture. This picture came this past weekend. Is my granddaughter. Her name is Livy. And it's like a 10-second clip, but you'll kind of get the idea, particularly towards the end, you'll get the idea of bubble jumping. I just loved how she bubble jumped here. Now notice she's chasing a bubble right here in the still photo. The bubble's right here. And this wasn't choreographed. I didn't ask her to do this. It's just somebody brought out some bubbles and I said, well, look there. I'll take advantage of this one. What's she going after? Come here, bubble. Here I go. Woohoo! That was screeching. And back to the bubbles. That just captured my attention, that if we can have that kind of excitement about change, that we see the bubbles being good for us. And then to me, this is where, again, as a Christian, it's helpful to know that God has directed you to it. And so we'll get to that in just a second. But what I felt, getting outside of your box and staying outside of your box is to become like a little child, trust God and the process. This is what the hardest place to do. And again, somebody like David could probably help really get down into the details of where this is important. When do you trust the processes you've always had? And when do you know to adjust the process? And that's usually where good leaders come in, is that you know when to make the changes that you knew is good for the long-term effect of it, but it's not going to rock the whole system apart. Some people are just built on change all the time. I've been in churches where every week the pastor was coming up with new visions, new ideas, and it was just constant change, and people felt like, where in the world are we going? And so there's this challenge of doing this, and this is why you'll see where bubble jumping comes. But let me just stay back into the focus of getting out of your box and staying out and not crawling back into your box. Feel loved, feel safe, but pursue what God has called you to do. And that's where the key is, having that discernment of what's there. So I just wrote down some things here that I think are helpful for you. You can add more for your own life, that where it's made you stable to make change. But Matthew 19, where Jesus says, you become like a little child. That's the essence of the kingdom. Hebrews 11, where it says, what faith is. Faith is the ability faith is the substance of things not seen. It's a future orientation. It's something, it's out there, but you can't see it yet, but you need to go for it. And it's the evidence of things. Faith is the assurance of things hoped for. Yeah, the future, and then the evidence of things not seen. And both of those are visuals that are future oriented, not tangible, but it's real. And in Hebrews 11:6, I love this, is because it says, you have to know that God exists. Faith is those who know that God exists, and he is the rewarder of those who diligently seek him. So if you're continually just seeking God and seeking his face, you will become that little child that says, okay, I'm willing to go change, even when it doesn't make sense to me. And this is where some of the aspects of when we talk about change and getting more knowledge, part of the knowledge is coming back to this area of faith, coming back and saying, Father, what did you call me to do? That's the knowledge you have to bring back into place. Staying outside of the box. I just had some things here in Philippians 4, forget the past, go to the future, hold the words that God has given you. 1 Timothy 1:18, if you read that scripture in the full version of it, it's just where Paul's telling Timothy, saying, hey, remember the prophetic words that you had. You need to war over those and fight for those. That's part of the knowledge and part of the attitude and the behavior changes and the actions that we do. And in Hebrews 10, which I like about this, is that he who gave you those words, that he promised to you, he is faithful to bring it to completion. But it says, go and stimulate one another to these good works. So there's the aspect of bringing people alongside of you. So doing this by yourself is not an easy task of bubble jumping. It's something you need to do with other people. So the next one, what makes a bubble? If we want to kind of get into bubble jumping, if we're thinking change is good and God is changing things around us, how can we get out of just the box thinking into bubble jumping, which is now a progressive future orientation, just like the little girl chasing the bubble. Now, okay, God, you're asking me to go sell this house. How do I do that? You want me to go to Romania? There's the bubble. So let me ask you a question. What makes a bubble? It's kind of written on the screen there. It's when the pressure on the outside and the pressure on the inside are the same. And so it might change a little shape, but basically where it's moving, it stays because of the membrane around it. There's pressure on both sides holding that bubble together, all the little molecules and stuff. What breaks the bubble? It's when pressure either on the inside or the outside changes. And you can see that like in, kind of easy with a balloon or something like that. It's easier to see it, but it's the pressure. And so like say at work, you're getting more and more pressure and you just got to leave, or, you can think of the things, if you start putting this into the images of you're changing, God's forcing you out of, maybe moving out of a city or, going to another place. Those pressures are coming in at you and you have to decide, okay, Father, are you giving me pressure to move on? And so those are the sort of things. Or if you're feeling internal pressure, sometimes we're feeling like, I'm just not comfortable here. Things are changing. What's happening? And so you have to resolve, is the pressure inside from God, or is this just me having to change my pressure valve in here so that I can adapt to the pressure coming out? Does that make sense? So that's the idea of the bubble, is trying to, okay, Lord, put me in the bubble that you want me to go to, the future orientation, like the little girl going after the bubble. If that's God's vision for us, that puts us in the mindset that we're ready to go to the future. The way to stay there, and again, I've already highlighted this some, is keeping your focus on the goal. And that's why you'll find with me, again, going back to hearing from God. And that's one of the things of training. Just thank you again, Kate, for sharing that you prayed over coming to this meeting. That's one of my little kind of quiet ways to kind of teach, training, equip you to say, okay, how can I do this when I'm going to Dubai? That's a big decision. Not necessarily that you thought of it that way, but that, okay, God, I'm just going because you led me, but he leads you step by step, but hearing his voice is very important. And I'll just share, it's not about me, but it was very important. I got a call about 15 minutes before we started from a lady that I've been friends with. Matter of fact, she's come on council table, but she's involved with a lot of world leaders now. And the tension that she's understanding now more and more as she's involved with world leaders, the things that are literally at war philosophically around the world. And it's just it's a painful place when you begin to see it. So there's changes going on with her. And she was calling, saying, Father, would I give her, some insight and wisdom as I was seeing it from the Lord. I had to be at peace, at rest, to be able to talk to somebody like that. And that's where I'm learning to bubble jump better, to stay at rest, pressure inside and outside, no matter who's calling, who's doing what, to be able to handle the moment the way it needs to be handled, because it was very important. And fortunately, just a few little thoughts and ideas that came, put her at peace. And it's just know that that's where you, like we started off this thing about no mere mortal, you don't know who you're touching every day when you're doing this, and being able to speak the words of God into the environment right now is very, very important. So I'm catching that. If I can highlight that as a motivation for you to be a bubble jumper, to move into situations that are not comfortable, but you know, God's leading you, you're going to have a better chance of changing the environment. And it just pops in my head about Moses, for example. You know, he sees the burning bush. He's kind of gotten comfortable in the back 40 for 40 years. And now God says, hey, tap, 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 I've got a change for you. And watch what happens with Moses in this situation. And I honestly, many times I feel like Moses like this. He says, hey, Moses, I want to take you back to Egypt where you got kicked out of because you did some things back there that they didn't like you for doing. And he said, oh, hey, God, hey, I'm not designed for that. I can't speak, you know, I'm just this, you know, I'm back here on the back 40. We all do that. Invitation to change, invitation to bubble jump and get into God's bubble. He says, hey, I'm going to be your bubble here. And he finally had to just rest into that. He goes down there and guess what? He gets comfortable in that bubble going, hey, I can talk to Pharaoh. Okay, God, you kind of got this. But then he's got to take him out. Now he had to jump from that bubble. Now he's got to lead out like 5 million people. That's another bubble. That other one kind of burst back there because now that game's over. Now he's got a new situation. Now he's got to feed all these people. That's a huge deal. I'm just stunned by that as I start putting myself in that situation. It's just crazy. But he began to bubble jump by saying, you know what? Okay, I'll trust you for this. I'll trust you for that. At one point, and we all kind of probably all feel a little bit of pain about this, is when God said, don't just hit the thing with your staff anymore, the thing you're used to, just speak to it. And, you know, he couldn't bubble jump at that point. He kind of fell off, you know, so I'm not condemning Moses. I'd have failed a long time ago on that one, but I'm just encouraging you. This is what the world is looking for. They're looking for the Jesus modelers who can do this, because Jesus was a great bubble jumper. He can move right in the middle of a crowd. Somebody touches garment and he goes, well, hey, what happened? To me, that's when the pressure on the inside and outside, he's getting pressure, but hey, he can react to that pressure. When the Pharisees are intimidating him, he's gone, I can answer that question, but you answer this one first. And that poise, that confidence in knowing who God is and who God has called you to be and the mission, you can bubble jump. So I'd encourage you along that line that these 3 things, keeping the focus on your goal, what God's given you, like in 1 Timothy 1:18, hearing his voice as best you can. And then I put this tightrope walker, Walensky, I think Walenska. Anyway, if you Google Grand Canyon tightrope, I think it's Walenska is his name. I may have the pronunciation wrong, but what's phenomenal about that, he's the 4th generation and he's walking across the Grand Canyon. It's about I think it was 1,500 feet across and 1,500 feet down. And you have the camera on his, you know, and so you're seeing it as he's seeing it. But what's cool is he's got a headset, and as the wind's kind of blowing, his father is speaking to his literal father's on the land over there talking to him as he's walking. He says, okay, son, crouch down a little bit. It always makes me cry because it's like, wow, can we get this intel? Here he is literally above 1,500 feet where he could fall. And his father's telling him, hey, crouch down a little bit. There's wind coming. And then he says, okay, now go ahead. And he said, oh, the rope's kind of moving a little bit. Hold on. It'll come past you. You know, just little insights that nobody else could see. But his father had they had sign, what do you call it? Just metric or whatever, sensors, that's the word, I guess, along the thing that could tell them what was going on with the wire. Amazing stuff. But it's all about just hearing God's voice, do what he says, take a step at a time. So there's nothing new in this. It's just a different way of presenting it to you, to be encouraged that God has got you. He loves you. It's all going to be okay. But hearing his voice is key. And then the last thing I had down there was others who can help counsel you. And many of you on this call, and I'm sure people that are listening to you, you have friends, but gathering some friends that are real close to you, that not only know you and care for you, but also can hear God's voice for you. Those are very important to us as we continue to move. No matter you're in high levels of leadership, low, God needs us all to be magnificent leaders. And those magnificent leaders, what he actually calls true father leaders, men and women who can think with their head and heart in alignment with him. So other thoughts? And Kate, you can, at this point, if you've got a story you want to share to maybe kind of capture this whole process, if it's kind of lit you up, if you're still on here, I can't see if that's the, but if you got a story, Kate, that you want to use to.
I am here. I have my camera off because I'm just standing here cutting vegetables. Michelle knows I tend to cook on your calls. I don't know why.
You do.
I'm not really sure why I do that. I love everything you shared, and there were so many things that stood out to me. And my kids actually kept walking by because I'm just like speaking into the air with like I'm on headphones. It doesn't really appear that I'm on the phone. And they're like, what's wrong with mom? But I just, yeah, so many things that you said stuck out. And I think what I wanted, I'm glad that I'm at the end because, or at the end of what you said instead of the beginning, because what I would share is very different. I mentioned earlier, like right before the recording started, that the circumstances in my life do not naturally lend themselves to the choices that I'm making, but the choices that I'm making, I feel like are what God is telling us to do. It's a lot of fun. And you started talking about the box, and I was like, yeah, that I am out of my box. I'm not really sure how that went. And then while you continue to share, it started to open up in front of me that the box I had been in up until about 5 years ago, actually, I think along the way, I had the sense that there were things in my box that needed attention. They either needed to be adjusted or removed, or there are things that were missing in the box that needed to be added. But for a variety of reasons, I did not tend well to the box. And I failed to notice when the box stopped being a physically safe place to be. And then one day I found out that the box was on fire. And so because the box was on fire, at that point, I ran away from it. But up until that point, I had been ignoring it, thinking that, the box is ultimately the safest place to be, no matter what it could possibly be missing. And anything that is not in order in the box is balanced by the other things in the box that are just fine. So there's nothing wrong with staying in the box. And then by the grace of God, the box caught on fire. And that was, for me, that's what it took to leave the box, because it wasn't salvageable. And what I'm recognizing for the first time, actually, while you were talking, Bill, is that in my 5 years since the box burned down, I'm in a different physical location, and I'm actually sometimes trying to build a new box. And it's like, I like boxes, and they're so orderly, and they hold things, and they're square, and they have right angles, and all the things that computer people love. So, and I'm sensing the Lord even in that, where, right now, like I said, I just established residency outside of the United States, and I'm trying to get it for my kids also. It's going to take a little bit longer, but I recognized while you were speaking the challenge to resist the temptation to reconstruct a box once you've left it. And that's just hitting me in so many different directions. So I don't even have anything else to say on it. But when you mentioned about hearing the voice of God on your directions and your choices and stuff, I just wanted to mention that for me, the way that I hear the voice of God had actually been part of the box. And I didn't recognize that. And so at first, when the box burned down, I felt very lost.
Wow.
Because I was not aware that I was hearing the voice of God anymore, because I wasn't hearing it in the way I had heard it before, like through the same method. So like I used to love to journal and read my Bible and all that kind of stuff. I still love to read my Bible, but I almost never have time to journal anymore. And so I could consistently hear from the Lord when I was journaling. And so since I couldn't journal, due to some things like literally not having the time, but then also a byproduct of trauma, I was having a hard time sitting down and focusing. And so then I lost confidence in my ability to hear from God. And it's been a process over the last few years of recognizing that it's in Proverbs, it says, let the peace of God guard your heart, guard your heart and mind in Christ Jesus. And it's, or maybe it's not in Proverbs, but it's in the Bible. And I'm like, wait a minute, it's not there. It's not in Proverbs.
Well, it's actually both. You do have it. It is in Proverbs, and actually in Psalm 130, 119, it's there. But you've got it. I think it's Philippians, Philippians 4, where it talks about it.
Be anxious for nothing.
Be anxious for nothing, which
is all
great.
In that same thing.
Yep.
And so, and I have little kids who are around me, but I also have a 21-year-old, and my kids hear my voice in different ways based on their age and how long they've been in the family, and what else, and what they've already been. Whoop.
Yep. It's
mute yourself.
Good.
And what they've been trained in. So my 21-year-old has been trained in things that my 5-year-old has not. And so my 21-year-old does not hear my physical voice in certain things like what clothes to wear for the day, or don't forget to eat today. But that has been built into him, like, this is what I need for health and wellness. And he just has that like internal guide and that peace that comes with knowing he's in the right place. But
yes.
Anyway, I'm excited. I'm grateful that my box burned down. And the thing that's cautioning me right now on not reconstructing another box, there's a dream that a leader at the Kansas City House of Prayer had, I think a few years ago, and they recently shared it again. In the dream, they're driving down the road, like a straight flat road like they have in Missouri, and she could see several traffic lights in front of her, and all of a sudden they all turned red. So there were 3 traffic lights she could see in front of her, and they all turned red at the same time. And in the dream, she knew that it represented the beginning of the end times. And what she heard from the Lord in the dream was, however much oil you have today is all of the oil that you have to go into this part of life. And it's that thought has been really gripping me the past couple of weeks, and is causing me to make some changes that are not comfortable for me, like behavioral changes. I'm thinking particularly related to like diet and exercise. If things get really hairy and I had to physically run with my children, I couldn't do it. And by the time you need that, it's too late to get it. So those are all the different thoughts that are rolling around in my head while I cut vegetables and listen to Bill Blaine. Are we going to be able to get a recording of this? Because I want to share it with somebody. Yay.
Typically I put it on the Council Table of Leaders Facebook. That's the easiest thing for me to do. If you want, and I put it in YouTube so you could gather it there, but I put it on Facebook. For most of you are on the Facebook CTL, so it's just instead of sending it out in the email.
Okay,
But
I'm not on Facebook, so yeah. I'll find you later.
No, that's all right. And I'll connect. All of us will get connected on I usually do an email within a day or two after this, after I pull the video back up. But I'll put that YouTube link in there for you too.
Okay, thank you
for that. A great summary. And again, please understand that what I give you, there are ways that you can, like she was saying, boxes are not bad, just as long as you know that God is bigger than the box. And that he can burn the box down if he wants. You know, he told Abraham, okay, you've lived here for a long time. Now I want you to go where you've never gone before, over to the land of the Chaldeans, or you had lived in the Ur of the Chaldeans and was moving over to Israel, or what would be a future Israel. So we understand that, but it's a hard thing for the soul, because we want to feel safe and we want to feel loved. And that's why some of the things too that are in your box, you can take with you. Doesn't mean you can't take some of the things that have been appropriate to you, but also sometimes God says, leave all that stuff in the box. So just know that this isn't a hard and fast rule. This is if you had to just boil all of this down, it's not about religion. It's about relationship. That's why I like transformational leadership, because what it combines in the essence of transformational leaders, and I kind of bridge it over to magnificent leaders, we're able to be both transactional and relational at the same time. And that's a beautiful thing for what the world really needs. We be able to be purposeful in doing what we're doing, but we have such a relationship with God, such an intimacy with him, that they see it and they feel it and they're attracted to it. And that's what, we want to bring the solutions to the world, but we also want to bring the presence of God. And that's why oftentimes I'll tell leaders, if you really want to make a difference in the boardroom or in your decision making, make it presence-based decision making. Presence meaning his presence, not you being present is one thing. But if you can bring his presence into that decision making, you're going to have a better chance. And that's incorporates the idea of hearing God's voice. Good job, Kate. Thank you for closing us out. Thanks, Jeff, for jumping in. We're going to, for those of you who need to bolt out of here, you can bolt, and I'm going to stop the recording.